Kingsley, I'm so glad that we have arrived to the end of 2020, and probably this is going to be our last recording. So this year went very quick, and it was quite spectacular. That has also made you writing quite a number of essays about the recent times that was unfolding even quicker than you anticipated before, as you have been writing similar essays the year before, but the situation of 2020 has created an acceleration. So can you summarize how you see now at the very end of 2020?
Well, it has been a very unusual year, and as you say, this will be our last recording for only this year, I hope, not the last. It's also probably, I think 2020 will go down as the anno horribilis, the horrible year in terms of human history. Although it could be a trigger for a lot more developments, but it probably in general will go down as, an awful year because of what materialized. And it has accelerated a lot of things. We can talk about that. It's accelerated a lot of political, technological, financial agendas. But, and it also has stimulated me and a lot of people to be writing a lot this year as well. Maybe for a lot of people we've been, stuck in our homes, and so also we get to scribble more. But at the beginning of this year, I did release an essay called The Consensus Reality Meltdown, which I was asked to put out my thoughts about how I thought 2020 would unfold. And so at the end of December last year, I wrote the essay Consensus Reality Meltdown. I was visioning that what had been happening previously about reality being so fluid, the lines between what we may think as the narratives of truth and untruth would blur a lot more. People would be living more in their reality bubbles, so everyone has like their customized reality. So the idea that we all agree to one consensus, common sense narrative would no longer be applicable, and that there'd be more of a kind of mishmash of different people's realities, which would then create a more fluid kind of, I suppose, mental field. Well, that has been accelerated because what happened with the unfoldment of the virus and the pandemic has really pushed people to consider their position, to consider what information they receive, what they believe, what they agree with, what they don't. But it's also polarized a lot of people, polarized them against their friends, their family for having a different opinion, a different position. In the past, families or friends were generally polarized through such ideologies as religion or politics. And these were the standard big kind of ideological platforms. Now, this has kind of gone micro, and people are having many, many different views about what's unfolding. There are a myriad of views about the biological issue. There are a myriad of views about the pandemic response. And within them, there's lots of different polarization. So I think, and people have chosen a different reality set or reality perception, which is still unfolding for many people, although some have chosen a fixed one. And that is creating a lot of kind of micro realities within the bigger picture. So it's actually been a much more intense and accelerated consensus reality meltdown that I had envisioned. So that's what we're seeing. And also I would say on the issue of what's happening this year, we know that there's been a biological outbreak, and there's the ensuing pandemic. The way I look at it is that these are two different things. One is biological and organic, and one is a social political construct. So, and I don't put the two together. And I'm not so much interested in looking at the biological virus element. I mean, it's still very highly contested how it originated, how it first spread. Was it a laboratory experiment that was accidentally released, deliberately released? Did it come from the animal chain into the human chain? These are questions that I'm not looking at. I'm looking. My background is a social cultural background, so I'm looking at the pandemic, which I see as separate. For me, the pandemic has been as opposed to an organic biological issue, it's an artificial issue in that it's a human-made social, cultural, political construct which is there to respond to this biological issue. And looking at the pandemic in that way, I see many other kind of positions to take, and many different realities are coming out from that, many different agendas from people in different positions, political agendas, financial agendas, technological ones. So it's been really a very polarized year. And so that has informed my writing to a great degree this year, looking at it from that angle.
That there are too many people and organizations that are trying to come up with the best ideas, the quickest solutions, that obviously is trying to heal something right now, but I'm not sure whether for the long term each solution is really what humankind needs. What do you think about these rapid developments that are tickling only just one symptom and not a whole?
There's been a very quick response to this pandemic, technological, health-wise, and such rapid solutions may not always be for the greater good. Now, there's been a huge push to get solutions to this, and that has brought a lot of people together with good intentions. But there are issues with that, of course, because there are a kind of overarching structures of institutions which, of course, have their own agendas, which may be multiple. It may be, yes, finding a solution, but it may also be at the expense of creating great profit quickly. And so, for example, the area of health has been highly contested. And this is, I think, making people confused as well, because generally human well-being and health is central to our lives, and we generally trust in our health infrastructure and our doctors and our hospitals, and rightly so. These are people, and they have been obviously in the forefront this year and working very, very hard and being under a lot of pressure. Around them, there's an infrastructure which is of a greater level. And so some doctors have had alternative opinions to what the general overarching narrative is. And when they've expressed those views, they've been punished for them. They've been ostracized, they've been thrown out of their jobs, they've been targeted. And so when you get a situation where you cannot have people expressing their own free speech and opinion, then it's problematic, and you have to ask why. Why are there certain agendas wishing to push a dominant consensus narrative? And I think this is what's been happening this year, is that as these overarching kind of narrative is broken down and being polarized, and people are in their different reality sets or reality bubbles, now there's a kind of attempt to establish an agreed upon authoritative consensus narrative or consensus reality narrative, that they are persuading people and pushing people to agree to this. Doctors are being pushed to agree to it, politicians and celebrities who have spoken out against the grand narrative, again being targeted and ostracized. And so that I find problematic. And I think that people are seeing that. People are able to do their own research. They're seeing that there are different narratives which are being dominant and narratives which are targeting and bullying other alternative narratives. And when they see that, it creates confusion, it creates division. And they, a lot of people don't know what to believe. Should I believe the latest health news and the health narrative because I trust health and science and the doctor and the kind of health industry, or now do I not believe it? So I think goodness is coming up against certain large-scale agendas, which includes, as I said, the pharmaceutical industry, political health industry, and governance. So it's problematic.
Yeah, as you mentioned, also fear. You have been writing essays about to fear or not to fear, for instance, which is the second section of your work in this year that was titled Questions of Our Times. Could you just summarize this series of essays that also been made into little documentaries, what they together are saying?
Well, yes, the essay you just mentioned, to fear or not to fear, I think is a core question of our time, because this ties into what I just said about these confusion, is that I think what this disruption in the narrative has caused is a form of cognitive dissonance, is that people are not sure what to believe, and when they hear a major narrative being told which they feel is not quite right, doesn't feel right, something within them, an internal filter says, no, that's not quite right. This creates the cognitive dissonance. And I think that's happened a lot. And fear is a part of that, because the grander narrative is pushing a lot of fear, health fear, biological fear, the fear of dying. And I mean, humanity is born with the fear of death. And I think we obsess more with death rather than living. And so the question of cognitive dissonance is that generally the mind wishes to find the quickest solution to bring coherence and comfort, to therefore kind of solve the dissonance. And generally the quickest solution is to agree or adhere to the dominant narrative. There's dissonance in that, but it, eventually by taking that on board, a person can really kind of settle themselves and kind of feel relief from the fear, and that's a problematic, because then people are being compelled to accept the consensus narrative. And on the other hand, those who are still in this fear mode, then of course, mentally, emotionally, psychologically, there's this dissonance, and this can ripple out through our social media, our relations, physically, as well as ripple out in terms of our energetics and our consciousness fields. So I think fear is a central issue, and that's why I've tackled it over the series of the questions. In that series of essays, talking about we should take a step back, we should try to find our own balance, try to find our own state of where we want to be ourselves, rather than getting entangled in the external narratives. I mean, I would say the bottom line is if we feel uncomfortable trying to find a position in the narratives or in what's happening around us, if the entanglement with the world right now is being chaotic, then we need to disentangle ourselves and take a step back mentally, emotionally, and find our own balance. Take off our shoes and walk barefoot on the grass for a while and try to reroot ourselves, get rooted in a very grounded way. So I think that's a key issue as well, is that our minds could be out there and we're not grounded down here, and that instability has caused a lot of issues, I think, for people.
Yeah, I see a connection with the years before. For so many years, actually, you wrote also a lot about the transitioning times, and many people sort of felt that change is coming. Of course, we probably did not think in terms of a pandemic, but a necessary change that is about our humankind and our own visions of how to be human and what is human. And so there were already so many discussions. You also wrote extensively about the need to return and discover our own beingness. And this comes now into reflection, as I see during this pandemic, that this fear, mostly as I see it, also comes partly from the narrative, but also from not knowing enough of ourselves. And this situation can be also a trigger for learning more, because probably we need to rely on more on our own resources, inner resources, and seeing how can the external technology support us, but not overwhelming us. How do you see this?
Well, the key word you said there is we're not knowing enough of ourselves, not knowing enough in general, not knowing enough of ourselves in terms of being in a kind of comfortable relation with ourselves, because especially during the lockdowns, if people have to spend a lot of time on their own, which people aren't, a lot of busy everyday working people aren't used to being stuck at home on their own, but also the knowledge of finding out more information about what could be going on. I think there's a responsibility for people to do their own homework and to research it, because if someone tells you what they think is going on and gives you their perspective, that's not the same thing. It's like, if you want to work out the solution to a problem or a puzzle, and someone gives you the solution, you don't feel the same, you don't grasp the fundamentals of it because you haven't earned it. I think people have to earn their own understanding and their own knowledge. Being given it can be a trigger, but it will never actually, I don't think, be absorbed in the same way. So that's one thing. And you go back to the mention of transition. I mean, if anything, over the past decade, I've been talking all about transition. It's probably, the thing I've been repeating so often. The book which I wrote in 2009, which was published in 2011, New Consciousness for a New World, was all about this transition. And I explained it in terms of complex systems, because that is one of my kind of, I suppose, study backgrounds was complex systems. And I put forth the model that when systems get to a point and of a transition point, they either break down or break through. But at that point, they need a greater amount of energy, which is usually chaotic energy, in order to further the shift to a new system. So I always stipulated that when we come to the transition, it's going to be chaotic, because transitions aren't made on smooth energy. Smooth energy doesn't have the kinetic power to create great change. That's why, if you look at human history, a lot of change has been made through revolutions, through upheavals. Great change is rarely made through smooth handovers. So, and any system needs a push of kinetic energy to force it into a new arrangement, a new state. So, I think one of the more positive sides of what we're seeing now is that we never really knew how the transition would come, how it would be triggered. We always sensed, me and other commentators in this field, we sensed that it would be a chaotic point. It could be economic collapse was a very popular theme we talked about. It could be some climate disruption. It could be through some technological disruptive innovation. More or less, it was going to be a kind of coalition of all these different potential disruptions. But we never, I never thought it would come just, so kind of sharply in one focus, such as the pandemic. That was in there in the mix, but not as one particular focus. But here it is, and it is chaotic energy. My sense is, though, that this hasn't even begun to play out in the long term. These are just the beginning days. And, I think there are vying agendas, vying interests to take this moment of chaos and to try to use it to fuel a certain way forward. So, such as the World Economic Forum has talked about the Great Reset, they want to take this time to fuel their agenda. And there's, I think there's other agendas in play. I think a great part of the tech industry, the tech digital industry, is also pushing for a future whereby, digital technologies will have a much greater play, a much greater influence in the world, because that, of course, supports the tech digital industry. And we can see that now. A lot of things are shifted online. Physicality has been pushed down. As one tech CEO said recently, that technologies are the way forward for the future because humans are biohazards, technology is not. So you can see agendas playing out there. And then I think humanity, people on the ground, have to also use this moment for pushing the human decentralized community togetherness forward, because there's energy there for stirring up people to really make the step now to take responsibility for the position and the future they want. So I think everything is, it's like when you kind of bang a table of dust or bang a table of sand and all the particles jump up in the air, poof. And I think that's the moment where we are now. Everything's being pushed into the air. So a lot of people are being pushed out of their comfort zones. They've been pushed out of their stability. And when you're in that moment of fluidity and instability, you are compelled to make choices now that perhaps you didn't want to make for some time, but you now are compelled to make them. And from making those choices now, we will see how the future will unfold in the coming days.